Welcome to another episode of the Real Estate Ballers Show. If you're new here, my name is Vee Lee and this is my co-host,
Adam Schneider.
This is the show where we interview upcomers, doers, and ballers of the real estate investing world. The purpose is to help you to reach your financial freedom in real estate investing faster. So Adam, who are we bringing on today?
Today, V, we are bringing on Gene Mack, and Gene's got a really cool story. He got into real estate investing about 5 years ago, so we thought it'd be really fun to hear him talk about being somebody who's got the experience buying houses and fixing houses and selling houses, wearing all those different hats.
Well, I can't wait to have Gene, so without further ado, let's bring him on.
Sounds good.
Hey Gene, welcome to the show.
Good morning, guys. Good to see you.
So Gene, thanks for being here today. We brought you on to talk about a very hard subject in the house investing space because, as you know, when an investor go and purchase a property, there's two things that can go wrong that can be a very costly mistake, which number one is they miscalculate their ARV, which is the retail value after the house is fixed up, right? The second one is why you're here today is when they miscalculate the repairs. And that can be very detrimental. So that's what we have you here to talk about. But before that, could you give the audience a quick introduction?
Sure. Thanks for having me. So I operate a Homevestors of America franchise going on about 4 years with that now. I've been in real estate full-time for 5 years. I did some real estate brokerage, some property management for a couple of years, and then joined Homevestors as a way to scale up what I was already doing. And before that, I was in project management on a not-for-profit running national conferences. So that's kind of my background.
That's awesome. That's very impressive. Are you the buyer for your organizations too?
I am not the buyer anymore. I used to, but about a year and a half ago, I partnered up with another investor, also a Homevestors franchisee, and we both concentrate on the parts that we like the best. So he does the buying and the selling. I do the rehabs and the rentals. So these days, I don't see a property actually until we've owned it and it's been cleaned out of all the crap.
Well, maybe I can convince you to move down here to Texas and do that part for me.
I think it's a lot of fun. It's much more tangible. The buy side is really relational, which I like, but it's transactional, which I don't like. You got to churn through a lot of different conversations, a lot of leads, a lot of people, and then it's done. I like being able to chew on a project for a while and see it go start to finish. I think it scratches my itch.
What about you, Adam? Do you like the renovation part of it or more the buy sell side of it?
Yeah, Gene and I come from opposite itches, I guess. I prefer to scratch the one where you get to have the deal making, and then once it's time for the renovation and the design and all of that, I don't have that much interest in it. Probably because I'm just not that good at it. Gene's much better than I am.
Yeah, I get stressed out on picking out paint color, backsplash. I go with the same thing because I just don't have to pick it,
Gene, if I can compare him and me, he's much more methodical and process oriented, and he lines up right along the way you need to for renovations.
I do like a process. Hopefully we'll turn 50 projects this year. We turned 36 last year between my partner and I. And so to scale at that size, you have to get systematic. I actually don't like picking backsplashes, paint colors, anything else like that. We either do the same thing every time, or we have a gal on our staff who's very designy, and she'll put an hour or two of her own time, and it always looks great. But I don't think that's the main piece.
And is designy an official real estate word?
It is. Yeah. The beautiful thing about English is if enough people say a word, it becomes a word. So just join me in.
Right? Kind of like Kleenex or Coke, right?
Right. That's right.
So, Gene, let's talk about this, like your process. When you first take a project, where do you start? What do you do? Talk us through that process from the beginning to the end, and then your day timeline, if you can.
Yeah. So I would start by highlighting something you already pointed out. which is that the number one thing that can go right or wrong happens before I actually get on the job. And that's your ARV and your estimated repairs. And then most importantly, your buy price, right?
Mm-hmm.
By the time I get into a project, we have X amount of potential profit. There's a range, and everything that I do from then on is just going to shrink that down. I really can't push it very much. I can make us towards the higher end, or I can make us towards the lower end, or I can make us lose money. But the buy is really what determined our potential profit, right? So Eric's my partner. We have a conversation about every property, both before and after, where he is explaining what his ARV is, what the price point is of the property that he underwrote it based on, and then what his loose idea of the scope and the rehab costs are. So I really show up to the table with that already created. That's new, so I can certainly come up with a budget, but our setup is that I start with a set of numbers and then I keep it under control as best I can.
So maybe backtrack to, because, when you go into the house after the fact, after you already bought it, you obviously got to work off the budget that was already predetermined at the time when you enter the contract. Right. So in that time frame, when you walk through the project and trying to come up with what to offer, you have that 1 hour window to look at everything you possibly can while you also bond it with the seller, do all of this stuff. So that's why I say being a buyer, you have to do so many things at once. You got to be their friend. You got to be the appraiser. You got to be the contractor. Right. So in that short time, what are your tips and tricks on how someone can just walk the property? Like Adam and I think we experience now. We can probably walk the property or estimate, okay, this house is going to cost me this much. But for someone new, how do they go about okay, my kitchen is going to cost me X?
Yeah, that's hard, right? And that's one reason I kind of practice with other people's money. Managing renovations for others, little rental turns, smaller type stuff, getting familiar, because when you're on the buy appointment, when you're meeting with the seller, it's all about the seller. It's not about the house. You do not have the time or the ability to create a budget. All you have time for is a spitball idea. That's just honest. It sounds like a scary, terrifying thing to say, but you are spitballing your renovation costs. So you need some experience. And I'd say the best way to grow that is to focus on simple houses like 1960s to 1990s, because they're all more or less the same. Cosmetic jobs only. And once you can eyeball a project and say, hey, that's going to cost me $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, you're fine. Then you can start getting into projects that are bigger, and you really do need some large budgets. Does that answer your question? That'd be my advice for somebody starting out.
So do you have a general rules? Let's say for me, for example, if it's a flooded house, meaning gutted, everything, installations and all, house totally gutted, it will cost me about $45 a square foot if I was to estimate a rough repairs number without AC, roof, foundation. Do you have some numbers like that?
I did last year. I don't anymore. Our budgets with the parts, the difficulty getting materials, labor costs shooting up, it's honestly really hard. Maybe you're doing a better job than me, but finding our footing in an inflationary environment is just difficult. But fortunately, my costs are going up and my sale prices are going up. So I guess it's okay.
So Gene, if you were to break down where you're making your misses, let me give you a couple of different options that might be what buckets they fit in. Do you think it's cost of material? Is it cost of labor? Is it downtime? Or is it hidden things in the belly of the beast that you hadn't predicted until you got inside of it?
This episode is brought to you by Buzz Vacation Rentals, a premier property management company in Houston and Galveston areas. Buzz Vacation Rentals specializes in managing short-term rentals the right way. Give Buzz a call at 281-549-8432 to learn more, or check out their website at listwithbuzz.com, and that is listwithbuzz.com. Now, back to the Real Estate Ballers Show.
All the above. Material costs are definitely shooting up. Labor costs are shooting up. going back to I do think the biggest way that I have missed on jobs is missed items in my scope, right? Unforeseen conditions. And that's why I would definitely encourage anybody starting out, do a cosmetic job. Don't do anything where you've got to ask about flooding, you've got to ask about gutting, you've got to ask about permits, you're trying to rearrange stuff. You just want to control what's above the drywall, make that newer, siding, roof, new HVAC fixtures, that kind of stuff. Because once you get in there, especially these older houses that people have monkeyed with, that's where I've gotten the worst pains, Adam, is houses they're old and they've been monkeyed with. Like other people have put their hands to it over the years, and then you come in there, you try to make it right, and you start gutting things, and now you're responsible for all the crap that you find. That's where I've lost the worst.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it's age related or just simply poor care and custody?
Mostly age related. And then if you get into additions, if people have added stuff on, for sure. But
that's a good point there on the additions, because so often people say, well, I added this room or that room, and so my house should be, you should include those square footage into my value.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, that stuff. Yeah, we have a list of what we call our landmines. And if Eric, our buyer, sees any of those, then I need to review the numbers before we make an offer. So an addition is one of those things.
So what are the landmines? I guess stuff in the crawl space?
A landmine would be like smoke, flood, fire damage, that kind of stuff. Ugly additions is definitely one. Unpermitted stuff. Foundation failure is another one. Unknown septic and well condition is another one. So if a property's been lived in, it's operable, that's fine. But if we're buying something that's been vacant for a long time, those are some big swings. Lead paint is another one. We test for lead paint on some of these older houses. I'm also a licensed GC, so I've got a little bit less wiggle room, right? Like if I buy a house that was in the lead paint range and I pull a building permit, I get a letter from the state saying, hey, did you check this for lead paint? You go through the whole certification process. So there's lots of bugaboos like that.
Mm-hmm. Do you think for somebody who's starting out and their aspiration is to be a real estate investor who's going to flip houses, would you recommend for or against becoming licensed as a GC?
I would recommend against it. I think having a license fits our purpose. I think a real estate broker's license is pretty helpful. It gets you a good familiarity just with contracts and timelines, gives you MLS access. It's not critical, but I'd say that's a lower hanging fruit in terms of a license to pick up if you really want to be a real estate investor. General contracting, unless you're really scaling and unless project management is your full-time job and you're getting into new construction like us, I wouldn't say that's worth doing.
Yeah, I think a lot of time when you get these specialty license, adding an additional hook on you, don't you agree? Like you liable for one more thing.
Right.
And as real estate investor, we already get blamed for a lot of things already when we flip a house.
Yeah.
So I have a different opinion on that one for a real estate brokerage license. I think it's a better place to be from a knowledge standpoint and an access to MLS standpoint, ability to monetize certain transactions standpoint. For all those reasons, I think that the benefit of the license way outweighs any concern about having a higher standard, because I think really we'd prefer in many cases, not all, but many, to just let everyone know that we're going to go by the highest standard that's out there.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
General contractor, I've never gone through that, and so that's probably a different conversation.
I do think it's different, yeah, for sure.
So, Gene, just to help people understand the estimating repairs before we go on another topic, is like, I know you don't have price per square foot. What about like price per area? Do you have something like, okay, this kitchen's going to cost me this much, this bathroom's going to cost me this much, a roof might cost me this much? Because I know there's no exact science, right? But is there a way that you can ballpark those numbers?
Yeah. So I'll tell you what I do right now, and then I'll tell you what I'd recommend for people that are doing something more reasonable. At this point, we break down all of our costs on a scheduled basis as if it were a new construction, right? So we come in there from excavation all the way to finish, trim out, rough plumbing versus plumbing trim. That level of detail and that kind of schedule is not necessary for your typical investor. I think a good happy medium, once you go beyond just ballparking like a percentage, like if I was buying a cosmetic house and I didn't know any better, I would just estimate 25% of my purchase price as my rehab costs and then figure out my profit margin that I need off my ARV. Like, that's safe, right? You're going to survive. After that, most hard money lenders will have their own budget breakdown, cabinets this, roof this. And so I'd say get your hard money lender lined up, get their budget template, and then just fill that out after you sit in the house and kind of by component, if that makes sense. I think that's easier than going by room. Cabinets this, roof this, HVAC this. And as long as you have a number in each of those big categories, you're going to be fine, because your number is going to be wrong, but it's not going to be missing, right? 50% off is way better than 100% missed.
Adam, you have any thought on that?
Yeah, I think just the things that are swirling in my head, the first thing is what's interesting is what Gene hasn't talked about. Gene has not talked about the impact of square footage on a house, which is the way a lot of people approach it, is on a price per square foot kind of basis. It's a 1,500 square foot, 3-bed, 2-bath, and they've got their price per square foot as their starting point, and then they do the add-on. So for me, I might say it's $18 to $20 a foot to cover the things that are really common, and then on top of that, I add roof or a crawl space or HVAC. So if I've got a 1,500 square foot house, and let's just say in my market it's $20 a foot and it's a 3.2, then that's a $30,000 plus my roof or my HVAC or my unique crawl space part. So that's usually how I would recommend spitballing it with a backing into it. And then like Gene, I'm usually way off, but way off means about a 10 to 15% cushion. And so that's just baked into the offer. Gene, I don't know if you have an appreciation for what I said, if you think that that's just not going to help anybody.
No, that's great. I did do that for a season as well, Adam. Kind of a basic square foot, and then add one-off items like HVAC, like roof. At this point, we don't chop it up that way, but I did use that. It does make a lot of sense.
Right. And that's for the person who's wearing the multiple hats simultaneously in the house with the seller, where you've got to go really fast and you don't have the luxury of time to write it out. Right. I wanted to talk a little bit about timeline and how important is time on the job, specifically with the topic being that there's certain parts that have to be ordered almost before you even put the property under contract, so that the windows or whatever material it is have gotten there. So how are you dealing with the fact that there's delays on things, and how important is time in the whole process?
Are you referring to like the sequence of the work?
Both the sequence of the work, and if you're going to make decisions on maybe buying something that's more expensive material because it'll get there faster, is that important or not?
Yeah, I do think that the overall market, the COVID ripples seem to be calming down. Last year, we hired a guy with a truck, and half of his work week was just spent driving around and calling any Lowe's, any Home Depot, any whatever, like, we need a tub, we need a stove, like, drive to every store, find it. If it's there, swipe your card, put it in your truck, bring it to the job site, because that was a huge factor. I think that's calmed down some. Long lead items like that. Yeah, last year we were just shoving it all in the house as we got it. It's a real pain. Now it's calm enough that we're running a normal schedule, and we've got reminders for, if we need counters at this time, 2 weeks beforehand, I need to text my guy to come out and measure, right? It's not as big of a factor this year as it was last year.
Yeah, there's a guy I know who last year needed windows. He lived in Virginia, and he ended up driving to Tennessee to get the windows, which seemed crazy to me.
It is crazy, but if that's what you need to finish your project, there's a few houses I did not do windows on last year for just that reason. The wood will live to fight another day. It is what it is,
Yeah, I replaced windows on a house recently, and I'll tell you, it was painful because it was partly my fault. I couldn't make up my mind, and then when I did make up my mind about replacing the window, it was hard to get the people out.
Yeah.
Most of them were real flaky. And then when they came out, they measured, and then they never got back with me. So then by the time I got to order, it took 6 weeks for the windows to arrive, and we were replacing sidings. So that was out of sequence, So window first, siding after, but now siding first and window after, and then touch-up paint. So that was painful.
Actually, that brings up a really good point we haven't touched on. Gene, can you talk through the sequence of how a basic rehab goes from what you do first to second to third to fourth to fifth. And just keep in mind that likely the audience that we have are people who are newer to this space. So it doesn't have to be super detailed, but it would be nice for people to know what not to do in terms of an order.
Yeah, for sure. I think the single most helpful sequence thing I can suggest is to get all of your demo done and all of your decisions done up front. Because what will just make you hate life is if you get something, for example, wood. We had this at a house recently last year. I tried to save some wood paneling. And then once we got through the paint, it was just awful. And now I'm trying to patch little sections of wood paneling, or I'm trying to do a little bit of drywall, and it's just awful. It just slows everything down. So I'd say that's why I don't even go on site and make a scope until all the crap is out. Because we buy houses with a lot of crap in it. So all the trash out happens first. All the trees are cut back. The lawn is mowed down. The attic's cleared out. The crawl is cleared out. Then I can see what's happening. Then I'm going to come in there and I'm going to decide if I'm going to demo stuff or not. And if in doubt, demo it. It's just so much easier to go clean than it is to try to fit old and new together. You can take that advice too far and spend way too much money. I'm not talking about, this kitchen's kind of jaded, got the kitchen start over. Not what I'm talking about. But so once you got everything out of the way, then basically, if you need to do any drywall, do your drywall. If you need to do any carpentry, do your carpentry next. That's assuming you're not doing any kind of gut electrical. Obviously, any kind of new plumbing, new wiring, new HVAC needs to happen first. So the rough-in trades, which I wouldn't recommend if you're starting, then drywall, then carpentry, then paint, and then all your fixtures and finishes and yada, yada.
What about your exterior sequence?
Exterior is great because you can do that anytime. It really doesn't matter. I know a lot of investors say do that first because you can get out of the way. It makes the property look like something's happening. That's awesome. But I've never been waiting on a job to finish on the exterior. There's just a lot less sequence to worry about. It's always the interior that gets me.
So on the exterior, if we have people around the country hearing this, some of them have some real considerations to make with seasonality, and they don't want to be stuck waiting to do a roof as they come into winter, as an example.
That's probably true. Move to the south would be my advice. Newer houses.
Right.
People.
Yeah, but I like the idea of doing the outside early just because of the look, and it gets activity that people can see, and you start to get that buzz if you want the buzz. When you were talking about your sequence, you didn't talk about flooring yet. Can you talk about flooring?
Sure. Yeah, sorry, I did skip that. Carpet, absolutely last. All the vinyl kind of stuff. Carpet and refinished hardwoods. Those are the last possible thing you can do if possible, because you don't want to get those dirty and messed up. Anything vinyl's pretty flexible. You can do that just about anywhere in the sequence once you've got your baseboards in. So if you're not replacing baseboards, you're not replacing doors, you can put that stuff in just about any time.
And are you talking LVP, the luxury vinyl, or all vinyl, or certain kinds of vinyl?
Yeah, LVP or sheet vinyl, because normally that stuff just gets cut around, counters, gets cut around toilets, that kind of stuff. There's some nuances there, but probably not worth getting in at this point. Vinyl, you just put it on over whatever else is there, as long as it's a decent floor, and you can do it just about any time.
Okay, great.
When do you do your foundation repairs? You wait till after the paint?
if you're new to this, don't do foundation repairs. Stay away from that. That's I keep learning new things about foundations. It's just a bag of mess. Yeah, ideally you would do that ASAP because you've got it figured out and before you mess with anything else. And that's also the point where you're probably going to write such big checks that you're terrified, and then you decide to wholesale the project. So yeah.
So I had a property that needed one helical pier, one H pier at the corner of the house. And so we ordered that, and then I had other stuff going on. I forgot about it. And 2 weeks later, the foundation people sent me an invoice. And so I went to the house and I sent them a note back, and I said, I'm so sorry. I'm embarrassed to say it, but I can't see where the work was done. Can you send me photos? Yeah. So they send me photos of it. And then I sent them a note back, and I said, there's good news and bad news for you. The good news is your people looks like they did a great job, but they did it on the house that's right next to my house. They didn't do it on my house.
Oh my God.
So it turns out my house, which was being renovated, was right next to a new build that was taking place. And the new build had all this activity with all these people there. And neither of our houses at that time had a mailbox with an address on it. And so when the people came to do the foundation, they just assumed it was the one with all the activity, and nobody on site was a supervisor. And so the house next to mine had a very stable foundation.
Very stable. One corner, just rock solid.
Exactly.
That's awesome.
Well, here's my foundation story. So I don't rehab a whole lot because I don't like to. I don't enjoy it. I rehab when I have to rehab. So usually when we try to hotel things, as what you call it, is to, after we buy the property, we do a cleanup and then we fix maybe some of the major items, or, and then put it on MLS for resale. So this house has foundation problem. So I decided to do the foundation. Well, that house, that scenario changed my opinion now of like, will I ever do foundation again? Because after we did the foundation repairs, the windows cracked, the sheetrock cracks. They had lines, but they didn't fall out. So once the house were level, now your sheetrock fell off, the drywall fell out. So I'm like, okay, so much for a hotel. Here I am dragging my butt to redo the whole house because of like the windows, the drywall. So I say to myself, I probably will not do a foundation repair again. I will do a roof, but I won't touch the foundation if I don't plan on rehabbing the house.
I think that just about everybody should make that same judgment. There's stuff that looks scary, and that if your everyday home buyer calls someone in the yellow pages, they're going to get like a long list and huge numbers, but it's really not that scary. And it's pretty easy for us to deal with as investors, right? Like a new roof, a new HVAC, a new electrical panel. That stuff seems scary, but it's really pretty easy. You can just knock it out. There's a ton of people that'll do it for you. But some stuff is legitimately complicated. It's also very different depending on the region of the country. Mm-hmm. Foundations is one of those things. Like, there is real expertise involved. And I just wouldn't mess with it personally.
Yeah. So my lesson learned from that is I probably should have left it at the engineer report. Hey, this house is going to need foundation repair. Here's what the engineers say. And here, you go fix it. Because, holes on the wall, cracks in the window, drywall falling out. Okay. So beside the foundations, what are some of the other big items that you would look out for, or that you come up on and you say, crap, we made a mistake. We missed this totally. And now it's going to cost us another $10,000.
Foundations can look like a couple things, right? If you've got a house that's a little bit shifty, especially in our area, I had a conversation with Adam about this property he was looking at maybe a few months ago. In our area, that's really common. We have clay soils. That's just differential settlement. It's fine. Those cracks are going to be there forever, but the house isn't going to fall over, right? Now you got a wet foundation. That's a totally different thing. You got a really old crumbling brick foundation. That's something I would stay away from. Weird additions is another one that's going to just cost you all sorts of stuff because Johnny homeowner tried to do something and it's just a disaster and you're not going to know until you get into it. Old framing. So before like nominal 2x4s, 2x6s, that stuff is a total crapshoot. It could be fine. It could be not. And it's hard to match it. Plaster walls. That stuff's a huge pain in the butt. You don't want to mess with that.
How about knob and tube?
I've never seen it.
You've never seen it? Okay.
What is it, Adam?
Electrical knob and tube is the old electrical. So if you get to the older homes, it essentially means you're going to need to redo your electrical is the short.
Oh, knob and tubes. Okay.
Yeah. Short. They're old. They're a century old.
Yeah. I've seen it, but I've never seen a house that was truly what was still there. It's always had a newer electrical system put in by somebody. A house that didn't have central air and you want to add that, or it was added later. Mm-hmm. Now you're getting into some real complications. That's a big one.
Hey, Gene, let me ask you this question. Going back, thinking about some of the foundation stuff where we were spending a heavy time.
Yeah.
Engineer report.
Yeah.
When do you decide to get an engineer's report? And do you go with the exact way the engineer report recommends to do things? And do you think that two engineers would give two different engineer reports? I
think engineering is really well spent money. I'm sure there's some engineers there that just live to be difficult, like any business, but everyone I've ever interacted with, it's a very reasonable fee and they're very reasonable people. They understand they're in the business of old houses. You can't make it perfect. Nobody's talking about tearing the whole thing down. And so especially like you get in the crawl space with them, you walk around with them. You're not trying to like breathe over their shoulder and say, hey, make this easy, fudge this. But you're legitimately asking, what would you do? What can I do? I think they're always reasonable and I pretty much do whatever they say.
Adam, for us, if we suspect the house to have foundation problems, we send the engineer out. He gives us a report. He tells us where to put the piers and, all the scope. We then will hire a foundations company to follow his scope. And then the engineer will come back out and do a final inspections and give a satisfaction report.
Yeah, that's almost always how it works for us. If it's a big enough job that it needs that specialized foundation company, because there's really sort of a small network of them, they all seem to know it. But it doesn't always need the foundation company. Sometimes it just takes the licensed general contractor to do it, but we do the exact same thing that you just described.
Adam, low foundations too, or low, in our area, it's all crawl spaces, right? V, I don't know if you guys do crawls out in Texas, but if you've got a really low crawl, there's much more probability of rotten wood, much more probability of foundation problems, and all of your subs are going to hate your guts trying to run stuff in there. They're going to charge you more if they're even willing to do it. So low crawls, that's another stay away.
Why do low crawls have a higher probability of problems?
Moisture, because the crawl needs to be ventilated. And so if there is any water in there, there's just not enough room for air to move through, things to dry out. The wood is really close to the soil. And so it'll dry rot in place.
I think you just brought up another good one, Gene. A lot of our houses are on slab. And This is something that I would walk away. I wouldn't even touch it, is when the house sits lower than the surrounding landscape. And you can probably see this too, right? Do you guys have that in your area where, the house sits lower? I'm not talking about the hill slope, but the aerations of, the outside of your grass, your yard, and it's feel like all your water drained into the house.
Yes, we have some downgrades. Hey, Gene, how is somebody supposed to keep track of all of the moving parts in a project? That seems like it can get so confusing and overwhelming, and you're relying on the subs, and you have it all planned out on paper, and then Charlie got COVID, so he's backed up a week, and that threw everything off. Talk about that.
Yeah, I've got a great story about Charlie getting COVID. I had a house 2 years ago, I guess at the beginning of it, and my plumber got COVID, was in the hospital for months. And in this particular municipality, only the actual trade person can call in for the final inspection. He wasn't even doing the work. It was one of his guys doing the work. And so I finally just everything was done. I staged the house, listed it for sale, and then I got a $2,000 fine because I didn't have a CO before putting furnishings in there, and I couldn't get it until Charlie got out of the hospital. Anyway.
And what's a CO for anybody who's not?
A certificate of occupancy. So if you pull a building permit, which you should not do, you should only do houses that don't require permits. That's like the final, okay, you're good. But in terms of keeping track, Adam, so we pay $500 a month now for a platform called Builder Trend. And at our scale, something like that is necessary. But I'd say you got two choices before that. Number one is, you just need to have enough time to be visiting job sites regularly and making lots of phone calls and track it any way you want to. Or you need some sort of site manager, general contractor, somebody that's going to do that, because it is a huge moving target. It takes a lot of energy to track it. Like, I think you have somebody, like you basically pay a GC to manage your jobs, right, Adam?
That's right.
Yeah. Somebody has to wear the hat. Either you, your employee, the general contractor, not necessarily a licensed GC, but just somebody that's kind of keeping the job site moving. Somebody's got to do that. It will not happen without real attention, especially for the kind of subs we have to use as investors.
So as we move into the top of the hour, how do you handle contractors so that you can protect yourself, in a dispute, whether it's money, like you pay them and they don't do the job, or the job was crappy, but you don't know it until later on? Do you have any good practice that you can share with the audience?
Yeah, well, my first plumber that I ever did, I lost $27,000 on my first flip. And among many, many mistakes, I had to, when I was looking for my plumber's W-9 or whatever at the end of the year, I Googled him and I finally found his address on mugshots.com. So that's not a good way to do it. I'd say in terms of keeping subs on track, again, somebody, either you or your site manager, general contractor, needs a detailed scope of work. That takes so much time. It's really a pain in the butt. It's nice to be able to walk through and be like, kind of do this and do this and do this and just a little this and a little of that.
Yeah.
And you haven't communicated anything. It felt good to you as the owner. You're like, okay, great. But there's way too much variability there for any sub to give you a good price. There's too much variability for you to get an apples to apples comparison from different subs when you just do that. So somebody needs to create the scope and manage it. And then I'd say just pay after you've inspected the work. So I used to drive around with my checkbook and I'd meet subs on site and I'd pay them as soon as it was done and it looked good. I got no problem with that. These days, we only cut checks once a week. So we got a procedure. We require photos, invoices by a certain time. But the biggest thing is just don't pay until it's done and then be clear about what you need done when you get a price, because otherwise you're going to be frustrated and so is the sub.
Adam, what's your practice on that?
I work with the same general contractor all the time. So we built a long-standing relationship. And so it's a little bit different than when you get started on it. But I think that it's a really good process, is what Gene just outlined, for the majority of the people until you're in place with one person. How about you, Vee? What do you do?
Same thing. We have scope of work, clearly defined scope of work. Then I walk the property with the scope of work to make sure everything on that list was completed. If not, probably some blue tape, stick some blue tape there. A lot of time I ask them for pictures because I may not be able to inspect personally. Pictures, video. And if somebody I work with for a long time, I can take pictures and video. I accept those. But as new people, I would have to meet them there, walk the property myself, or my GC to walk the property, then release a check.
Yeah, I almost never walk properties unless it's something that's really big. I just go off of the photos. So there's a risk factor in doing it that way, but there's an efficiency component that outweighs it.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's, at the end of the day, it's what you're willing to accept, right? Cost, risk. If you don't inspect it and something go wrong, can you live with it?
Right.
Yeah. Any last thing that you want to share, Gene, as good practice, things to look out for?
When I was trying to get started or getting started and listening to podcasts like this, there's a million good nuggets out there, but it can be really paralyzing. I would just say, if I'm sitting down with somebody and I got 1 minute and they're just getting started or they're trying to get started, they're in their first couple deals, you have to accept the fact that construction cost estimating is a guess, no matter how expert you get. I'm still guessing, right? You're just trying to get your guess a little bit tighter. And if you're getting started, it's going to be a bad guess. And that's okay. Just make sure you've got enough room and you buy a house and you get experience. I mean, I told you I lost $27,000 on my first flip. That's not a great way to build a business, but it's a better way than never buying a house and never learning. Like, I'm still here, right? It's tuition. You got to pay it somehow. So cosmetic job.
Tuition. Love that.
Older, no permits, lower end property, close to you, and then just guess and you'll be fine. Go from there.
I learned this from another investor. He said, this is an about business. The house worth about this much. The repairs cost about this much.
That's right.
And it's going to take you about this long to sell.
That's great. Yeah, our risk tolerance is probably the best defining characteristic of a real estate investor here, right? You're just willing to handle a lot of abouts that your average person is not.
So really, we're in the about business is what we're really in. Is that what you're saying?
In the about business. That's right.
Yep.
So Manos.
Yeah. Got it. Hey, Gene. So besides doing houses, what are your hobbies?
I've got 5 kids, age 8 and under. So that's mostly it. A beautiful wife. And if I get a couple of runs in and a couple of beers and a couple of basketball games, I'm a happy man. So right now, UNC is just destroying the world. So I'm delighted.
They had some rough refereeing against them the other day, didn't they?
A little bit. Yeah. But you know what? You can't control those things, but you can I love our coach. He didn't even answer that question. He was like, yeah. Referees, whatever. We came back, we beat them. So
you got me at the beer and you lost me at the UNC.
That's fine. Texas Tech is also doing well.
All right. Well, thank you for being here today.
Yeah, my pleasure, guys.
Thanks for watching the Real Estate Ballers Show. If you find value in this show, please share this episode with a friend or give us a shout out on social using the hashtag REBallers. It will also help us if you can leave a comment below. Let us know what you learned, what's working for you, what's not working. Thank you so much. See you next time.